In today's interview, I'm talking with Rania Batrice. Rania is a longtime political, policy, and nonprofit operative. She's the former deputy campaign manager for Bernie Sanders. She's one of the partners at WIN, which is a political media company. And she sits on the board and is involved with dozens of organizations that are helping positively impact this world. We're going to get into everything from politics to being in quarantine with an abuser and what quarantine looks like for people suffering from domestic violence and abuse. We're also going to touch on finding common ground and how we can actually reach across the aisle on many of these hot button issues to find some progress across the board. So lots of great things in this interview, and can't wait for everybody to hear this conversation. All right. So I am super overjoyed because I get to talk with one of my dear friends, Rania, who is well-versed in a million fields that matter to all of our lives, whether you realize it or not. So we're lucky to have her with us today. I will try to skim over some of this, and then you could correct me and add to this list because it's really impressive, and there's no way I can get by without reading. So Rania was the former deputy campaign manager for Bernie in 2016. And she's been involved with Our Revolution, March for Our Lives, March for Science, the Arab American Institute, the Freedom Project, Sunrise Movement, Change the Ref. She's the founder and president of Batrice and Associates, which is a communications mediating organization, legislative strategy firm. And WIN, your partner at WIN, which is a political media firm, and some of your clients, some people might have heard of some of them. Barack Obama, I think his name is. I heard he's done something. Bernie Sanders, Cory Booker, Kristen Gillibrand, Chris Coons, Tammy Duckworth, and the list goes on and on and on. And Rania is also an outspoken advocate for issues around domestic violence, gun violence, and many others that she will talk to us about today. So how did I do? Did I miss anything? And did I mispronounce anything?
No, that's except for the Arab American Institute, but that's okay. It's a lot. There's a lot. No, it's okay. It's okay. I've been joking recently, I think just to make myself feel better, that last month was 20 years in this kind of world of politics and policy and advocacy. And it is depressing that I can speak about things in 20-year terms, but it is a lot over 20 years. It's been just a lot of different experiences for sure.
I would love to see I'd like to hear about some of your background, because I know you're from Texas. I know you come from a conservative family, and you're a first generation Palestinian American, or is that correct?
That's right. Mm-hmm.
So what was that upbringing like, and how does that bring you to where you are today and all that you've accomplished in your field?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and I over the years they've gotten asked that. I was asked that question a lot, and I never really had a good answer. I started kind of thinking about it a little bit more over the last couple of years and realized that my upbringing and my childhood, it was unbelievably tumultuous and really awful at times. And I turned about 10 or 11 years old and realized that I didn't want what the family wanted for me as a Palestinian girl. And it was tough. It was really hard, but I really, like I said, over the last couple of years, I've realized that I've been fighting against inequality since I was a little kid. And I have two brothers who I love dearly. And I just have to also say I'm very, very close to my parents. It was a rocky upbringing, but we're very, very close now. But, I have two brothers, and I literally watched them live by a different set of rules. And my dad would say things to me like, no, this is not equal. Yes, the rules are different for them. And that was just, I think it really prepared me for the life I would lead in the career that I would choose and the path that I would be on into my adult years, because he's more honest and blatant than a lot of the people I work around and work with. But yeah, it was definitely not always easy.
Did you fight that early on, or was that something
Oh
that you kind of
yeah.
accepted and then later in life realized that wasn't right?
Oh no, it was ugly, honestly. And it's funny now. It's funny now. It was not funny then, but I'll talk. Sometimes I jokingly talk about how my parents hated me when I was younger, and people say, "Oh no, that can't be true." And my mom or dad will try to be like, "She grew horns when she turned 11." I mean, it really was like
Wow.
really, really rough, and it was constant butting heads and fights and arguments, and just it was bad, and it was bad. Like I said, at a very young age, and um, it it never. It took me a lot of years and a lot of therapy, which I'm a huge advocate. I think everybody needs a therapist, but
Hmm.
to finally come to a place where I recognized that as much as I disagree with them, and we still agree on nothing. Let me be very clear. Um, but they were coming from a place of care and concern. They came from a place that was very, they had a hard, tough life, and they left their situation to give us a better life. But what was better and what they considered to be best for me was not what I agreed with, obviously, but it was coming from an authentically, very genuine place of care and concern. And it took me, like I said, it took me a lot of years to get to that point of understanding and appreciation, and understanding that I can appreciate that without accepting the premise, without saying, oh yeah, that is, I
Yeah.
do want to get married when I'm 18 years old and have a slew of children. Like, no, I don't have to do that, but I can also appreciate their concern.
Yeah. No, and I'm glad you bring up that nuance of, there is still love there. There's still understanding. And sometimes it takes years to get to that point. But I think that's the only way that we can move forward. And that's what this whole series has been about, that too. Just understanding how to have dialogue and conversation and respect for the other side. It does not mean you need to accept the narrative, but to accept the individual, and be able to move forward, I think is really important. So I'm glad you brought that up. Um, I'm assuming, obviously, it sounds like your upbringing has led to a lot of your work, throughout your life. Can you speak to, your work around, gender and women and domestic violence, and what you've done in that space? And I think it's particularly interesting now because, I'd love to get into the quarantine issues with you as well, because now that people are sheltering in place, they might be sheltering in place with an abuser. And that's something I want people to hear about. I don't know if that's talked enough. So I certainly want to go into that. But can you talk a little bit about your work in that space?
Sure. So I am a survivor of incredibly abusive relationship. It was emotionally abusive, physically abusive, financially abusive, um, and coming out of that relationship and that situation, was torture. I mean, it was awful. It was. Yeah, I wouldn't wish it on anybody, obviously. I'm grateful that I'm able to utilize that horrible experience to do some good. I was very fortunate to have a dear friend who I was actually just talking to you about, Abby Farron, she's like my sister. Her son's my godson. I mean, we have done life together, truly. And she's the one who really stepped in front of me, because it's when
Mm.
people say things like, oh, that's textbook, it's because it is actually textbook. And a lot of times survivors blame themselves. There's a lot of manipulation involved, and so the kind of recidivism and going back and making excuses, and it just sometimes takes a really, really long time. And when you have somebody in your life who's willing to step in front of you and say, no, not happening, and really help you sort of peel back the layers and see what's actually going on when you can't
Yeah.
necessarily see through the fog, it makes a big, big, big difference. And so that was kind of my entry into the space. I've always had a passion and a drive for issues of inequality, but this specifically around domestic violence and human trafficking, and the atrocious abuses that so many women especially suffer across the country and around the world. It I jumped full in after surviving my own situation. So that's kind of how that all happened. And it took me a really long time to talk about it publicly. I had so much shame, and I blamed myself for a really long time, and really didn't know how to come out of it. And I worked in this very still very male driven industry. And so I had so much fear around somebody finding out and it diminishing my power, my presence, my space in this place. And I'd worked so hard to get there, and all of the things. And so I just was constantly living in this fear of being found out, as though I had done something, as though I had something to hide, like I had done something wrong. And there is kind of a stereotype and a stigma and this thought. And I remember actually my dad, who again, I love dearly, when I finally told him, he was shocked. I mean, truly, truly shocked. And the first thing out of his mouth was, of all the women in the world, you're the last person I thought would let this happen.
Wow.
And that is sort of and again, it was my dad, so it stung extra, but that's not, it's not unique to him. There is kind of this thought process around what type of women get abused and what kind of personalities they have and all
and
of
putting the responsibility back on you.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Wow. And it sounds like that going into that work out of your own, situation of abuse sounds like it was part of maybe your therapy process, and part of your way out of it was to find strength in empowering other women. Is that fair to say?
Absolutely. Because I think one of the things that happens with trauma and abuse is you tend to feel like you're on an island. Like no one else understands. You're all by yourself. You feel crazy sometimes. You feel like, was it really my fault? Because you've just survived so much manipulation and so much, just literally the breaking down of every bit of your being. And so you feel like you're alone. No one else could possibly understand. And I remember it was probably the first 2 months laying, Abby, I was talking about before, laying in her bed, just sobbing and saying all these things and feeling totally nuts. And she just so happened to have found her journal, because she was also a survivor. Where
Did you know that?
Yeah, I did. And she's actually the one who recognized the signs and said, okay,
Gotcha.
I know what's going on. That's it. It's over. And so as I'm like just sobbing and losing it in her, in her bed, in her home, and she pulls out this journal, and all of the things I was saying, she had written like 10 years before,
Wow.
And so there really is an opportunity. And I'm not, everybody has to have their own path and their own journey to recovery and rehabilitation and all the different things. But for me, just being able to sit across from another woman or a group of women and say, you're not alone. I went through it too. I felt the same way. That asshole that you were with was the asshole I was with too. And here are all the things. And just help, at minimum, help women feel like they're really just not in it by themselves. They're not on an island. There are other people who understand, and it's not their fault. I think that is one of the hardest things to come to terms with, is we blame ourselves for a very, very long time. And if there's nobody there to tell you that it's not your fault, why would you think it's not?
Yeah, no, of course. I think the power of community is massive. I think when dealing with trauma in any sense, we've been speaking with people dealing with addiction. I've been talking with a lot of people with lupus, all of which they have their own support groups, which have gotten them through this because of that, what you just said. I think realizing you're not on an island is the biggest comfort and step from actually realizing you can do this, because it isn't just you. And I think whenever we deal with some sort of adversity at that level, you do feel like it's just you. And that makes it incredibly hard to come through it. So Um, yeah, that's great to hear that. Is this where love and freedom came from? I don't want to jump too far ahead, but I think it's an amazing organization and what you've done with that. I'd love for people to hear about that. And this also sounds like another response to that type of work. Can you speak about love and freedom?
Yeah, absolutely. So, Love and Freedom was a, a, an idea that Abby and I had many, many years ago, probably 10 or 12 years ago. We had done a lot of work around domestic violence and human trafficking overseas. We'd always wanted to focus in on domestic the domestic side of it too across the United States, because it's a huge problem here obviously as well. But it was a really tough thing to try to figure out how to transition, because a dollar in Cambodia, for example, goes a lot further than a dollar in the United States. And
Yeah.
so um, Abby is a fashion designer, and has always had kind of the humanitarian piece. Fashion is a really horrible, terrible industry, which we can talk about more later.
Yeah.
from a pollution standpoint, from an exploitation standpoint, like all the things. But Abby has always produced all of her product in the United States, has always paid everybody a living wage. The Freedom Project, which I was on the board of, was kind of that international focus that we had on just giving back. But we talked about this, and finally had an opportunity to kind of launch this idea into action. And we partnered originally with an organization located in Dallas called New Friends, New Life. And they really do a lot of the work around the rescue and rehabilitation, the counseling, the therapy, providing wraparound services to women coming out of these really terrible situations. So we partnered with them in what we called a pre-pilot program, and developed these scarves that I'm wearing one, and
Nice.
taught
Can you
taught
hold
the
that up?
first.
I'd love to see
Yeah,
those.
yes, actually, here, see if I can take it off without
Wow.
messing everything up. They're very cool, and they're made by the women that we work with, and it was very much kind of like the first thing. Abby got this group of women together, and it was therapeutic on a number of levels. I mean, just being creative, there's a lot of studies behind how creativity helps with processing and trauma and grief and all of these kinds of things. And so, long story short, the pre-pilot program launched into Love and Freedom, and we have a third co-founder. Her name is Elle Lewis, who's just a brilliant artist. And and it's a survivor founded and survivor led organization that focuses on vocational training and soft skills training and job placement, which in the US, there are a ton of amazing organizations that do the rescue and rehabilitation and the trauma therapy and things like that. But vocational training and job placement beyond the
Yeah.
survivor job
Hmm.
is something that's really lacking. And Texas is one of the worst states in the country for human trafficking, and of course we have a huge domestic violence problem as well. And so we focused in on the Dallas Fort Worth area, and have just had a lot of success with this first class. Yeah, so that it's been really incredible to just work directly with amazing women who are so smart and so talented. And this was sort of just the next step for them that we've been
Yeah.
able to work with them on.
No, I love that. And congratulations on that launch. And I think it's important to, I think we do hear about survivors, and this has been a theme lately too in a lot of these interviews, of getting past survivor and being able to thrive and being able to, empower yourself in multiple different ways. I think is really essential to the path of a survivor. So the fact that you're looking at that in multiple different ways, I think is really admirable and inspiring. So kudos.
Thank you.
Yeah. Um, excuse me. On that topic too about domestic violence and abuse, like I had mentioned earlier, I would love to hear your thoughts on what the quarantine and the pandemic has maybe brought to that issue. It's nice to see everybody baking banana bread and figuring out their new workout in the living room. But not everyone gets that luxury, and I think that that story needs to be told. Can you talk to us a little bit about that issue right now?
Yeah, it's really terrible, actually. So across the United States and globally as well, there has just been a huge uptick in calls to domestic violence hotlines and calls to police departments. Their abuse is on the rise, and in large part, it's because um, and mostly are quarantined with their abusers, and they're having to choose between, going out and subjecting themselves to potentially getting the coronavirus or staying home with the person who is abusing them. And it's just a really, there's this is like such a, it could be such, we could have a whole conversation just about this, about the systemic issues that are just being brought front and center. They're not new, they've been there the whole time,
Yeah.
but this global pandemic has really brought it all into focus. So one of those is domestic violence, and there's a number of issues, not least of which the Violence Against Women's Act is expired over a year ago, and Congress still has not reinstated it. And it's a fight over a gun provision that would close the boyfriend loophole in the updated Violence Against Women's Act, which, I mean, explain to me on what planet, if you're married to somebody and they were violent, they shouldn't have a gun. But if you weren't married to them and they were violent, that person's cool to have a gun.
Yeah.
I don't get it. If anyone can explain it to me, fantastic. And that is, as you know, it's one of my other lanes of work is in the gun violence prevention space. And in addition to the uptick in domestic violence and child abuse, the rise in gun sales in this country has just been astronomical. I mean, like historic levels. And then you have the NRA putting advertisements out there telling people to use their stimulus money to go buy guns, and literally telling people, here's what your $1,200 can get you. I mean, huh? Like, I can't, I don't even know where to start with it. But back to just the systemic issues that have been prevalent and were there and were not even considered ahead of putting shelter in place orders, which of course were 1,000% necessary and are 1,000% necessary. We need to continue to listen to science.
Yeah.
And at the very minimum, allow our healthcare workers to catch up.
Yeah.
And I don't know, maybe take a breath at some point. I don't know when that's going to happen, but
Yeah.
But the consideration for victims of violence was just not even considered, and shelters are doing the best that they can, but they're having to adhere to these orders and again listening to science, so they can't take in as many people, and it's hugely problematic. And my hope is that we take this and we learn quickly and run with it. And there is, I will say, Guns Down America, has been tracking, actually, and maybe we can drop this in comments or something, but they've been tracking the rise in calls around domestic violence and child abuse from state to state. And so there are organizations that are actually doing the work and tracking so that we can utilize those data points. And a lot of those organizations have also come together to really push Congress, because they're talking about the next relief package, which I think this is number 5.
Yeah.
Since the pandemic really hit the U.S. But there are GVP groups that have come together that are specifically talking about how Congress can act now through the next stimulus package, and really focusing in on the domestic violence and gun issues that are at play. And you just can't ignore them.
Yeah.
They're front and center. And there's work to be done. There are things that they can actually do. It's not just like, oh, we throw our hands up in the air and there's nothing to be done. That's a just absolutely false narrative.
Yeah, and to your point too of, this is nothing new, but I think for some people it is, and that's what
Yeah.
I want to make sure that we're raising that awareness. Um, and the gun issue is its own issue. I think it's obviously layered into this, but that's something um, that I don't want people to get caught up in that, so they're not trying to solve this as well. I want to make sure that people are understanding the implications of what this means and the rise in gun sales and what that means for people who are being abused, regardless of how you feel about it. Like, I don't think anyone wants a situation like that. So,
Yeah. Well,
one of
and
the
just one real quick point I
yeah,
want to make for that I think helps illustrate, because you're right, you're exactly right. This is not something that is in the forefront of everybody's mind, but the presence of a firearm in a home with an abuser makes it 5 times more likely that the victim will be killed.
yep,
And so, if nothing else, if we can just wrap our brains around the fact that people with a history of abuse should not have guns in their households,
yep.
especially, maybe we could at least all agree on that.
100%. And that's, we, Common Ally is obviously nonpartisan. We believe in having dialogue to bring people together on multiple issues. And, there's also things that just, in my personal opinion, aren't up for debate. I mean, human lives are at stake. And I think that the facts and the stats are there. And that people need to humanize these situations. And this is one of the things that I think you do so well in your work, is that, you're a master storyteller. You understand from an empathetic role um, how people are affected by issues. And I think, I'd love for you to talk about Change the Ref as well, because, you had invited me to the launch of Change the Ref, and it was honestly one of the most memorable days of my life. I sat there weeping like a baby for the entire thing because it was so powerful to me. To hear him go through that story and the way he told it, and I'll let you talk about Change the Ref. I don't want to ruin it, but um, it's just an example of how when you put human story into this instead of just, this is my right and that's it, and into conversation, you just keep hitting walls, and we're never going to advance legislation or even, unification across our country. But when you put humans into that, I think that changes things, and that brings people closer together, who might have been more polarized. So can you talk about Change the Ref a little bit? I'm sorry, that was a little
Yeah,
long-winded, but
no, 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 it's okay. I love that it stuck with you, because that's the whole point. So I am on the board of Change the Ref, and it's an organization that was founded by Manuel and Patricia Oliver after their son Joaquin was killed in the Parkland shooting. And the thing about Manuel and Patricia that sometimes gets left out of the conversation is they immigrated to the US from Venezuela to give themselves and their 2 children a safer, better life. And their son was killed in his classroom. And so I mean, I can't even think about it really honestly without kind of getting emotional over it.
yeah,
Just the reality of that, to come to the United States looking for a better life and to lose your kid in his classroom. I mean, it's just insane.
hmm,
And so, I mean, almost immediately after the shooting, Manuel and Patricia founded this organization. And Manuel is an artist. He's a brilliant, brilliant artist, and was an artist before. And that's what he knew. And so Change the Ref really focuses on utilizing art as a activation tool, but also as a point of entry. And like you said, storytelling. And the show that you came to, it's called Guac, My Son, My Hero, which we're working on kind of a virtual presentation of that. So
oh,
everybody
nice,
stay tuned. Yeah. But it is unbelievably powerful. And it's not partisan. I mean, Change the Ref is not a partisan organization. It's
yep,
about saving lives, not about anything else. And the thing that is so impactful about this show is it's Manuel talking. It's a one-man show, and it's Manuel talking about his relationship with his son.
yep,
And who can't identify with that? You know what I mean? And there's art, and there's music, and you'll laugh and you'll cry, as it's really like a roller coaster of emotions, but it is so powerful because it is storytelling,
yeah,
and it gives people a place to kind of step in. And I often say, I mean, I know I'm kind of a political wonk or whatever you want to call it as well, in addition to these other things. But I've always believed that all the labels are part of what's so harmful, because really at the end of the day, it's all about humanity. And do you care about human beings? Whether it's your daughter or son or dad or next door neighbor or cousin or, the person on the other side of the world, do you care about them as your brother or sister, as a human being, as a citizen of this planet?
Yeah.
Okay, if the answer is yes, then we can start there.
Yep.
We may not agree on how to get to the place that we're trying to get to, but at least we can start the conversation there, which is part of what I appreciate so much about what you're doing. Is it's really uplifting that idea of, can we have productive dialogue for the greater good?
Yep. Well said. Yeah, I agree. And I don't think we need to agree on how to get there. I think we just have to understand that we are one species first, and bringing in the humanity is everything. And that, back to change the ref for a second. And thank you for your kind words, by the way. First of all, anything that says like spoken word or one man show, I normally like start like pedaling back, right? And this is just, thank God, put me in my place, because the way that Manuel used mixed media, and back to that story in Venezuela of when he was a kid with a gun to his head, and then and remembered that story and came to the US, to Parkland, which like felt like a theme park, and to be able to like witness more tragedy here, really says something about the state of kind of where this country is on violence. But the relationship between him and his son, me as a father of a little girl, I mean, that was obviously my trigger as well there, of just that relationship of the bond between music and that they had, and like how that bond, it really resonates that bond is no longer there, and cannot come back. And obviously he's found ways to relive that and to share that with people, and find this new blossoming in a way, but still that was taken from him. And I have conservatives in my life, I have liberals in my life, I have moderates. I think if all three of us were sitting in the audience watching that, we'd all be moved in the same way. And then it's our role, I think, to have a dialogue almost immediately after, to say, okay, you were moved now, let's talk. And I just, that's what I'm trying to do at the very least. Like, I hope we're accomplishing that in some way. And I see you doing that in your daily life. And that's why I'm just so happy to be talking with you today about this.
Well, thank you. And read that, just on change the ref a little bit more, that is one of the things I really do appreciate about Manuel and Patricia, is obviously they're focused on making sure their son's legacy and his activism continues, but they are so generous and they will work with everybody. And it's not just about mass shootings, which are tragic, horrible, but the gun violence epidemic is so much bigger than mass shootings. Whether we're talking about domestic violence, or we're talking about community violence, or we're talking about police violence, or whatever that we're talking about, it's so much bigger than school shootings, which again are so tragic. But it would be so easy for Manuel and Patricia to only focus on that, and only focus on Parkland, and only focus on Joaquin. And almost from day one, it's been so much bigger than that. And I really think part of it is because Joaquin was that way. Mm-hmm. He was so much like a citizen of the world and really aware of what was going on. And you're right. I mean, that was taken away. And actually, one of the projects that a Change the Ref project is called the Museum of Incomplete. And it is artifacts of people who lost their lives to gun violence, of things that have not been completed. So Joaquin's jersey from his basketball team where he didn't get to play in the championship game, art pieces that were not finished. We had somebody submit, it was a photograph, obviously, because it'd be really tough to mail, but a tree house that he didn't get to finish with his kids. And it's just, it really is, it's like these legacies just get cut off. And if we can stop thinking in terms of just data and metrics, which are important, like
Yeah.
facts are important, of course, but if we can start thinking in human lives and again, the humanity of it all,
Yeah.
I think we'll be able to get somewhere.
I agree. That brings me to win. Um, I feel like um, that approach to solving problems and to telling stories and moving people, I don't think anyone does it any better. I mean, some of those political ads and some of the work you do there, from an agency standpoint, does Win follow a similar ethos?
Absolutely. And I always have to it's sort of like telling on myself that I hate political media. Like I just hate it.
Yeah.
I think it's terrible for the most part. It sounds the same. It looks the same. It's like candidate in front of, the bookshelf, like speaking, and I'm like,
Yeah.
who
Yeah.
believes that? But I obviously am a partner at Win for a reason. And the thing is, even before I became a partner, we had done a lot of work together. And one of the really, really, really cool things, of course, I'm biased. I'm a partner at this firm. However, I don't ever do anything that I don't believe in and I'm not passionate about. So I will preface it with that. But one of the really cool things about Win is we have political partners that come from all different kinds of backgrounds, geographically, from an experience perspective, but we also have an honest to God artist who's our creative partner. And he's not a political junkie like the rest of us. He is an artist who just gives a damn.
Yeah.
And so I wish I could take credit for the brilliance of the spots that come out of our agency. I
No, but I
can't.
mean, I would say that it's the
Yeah.
combination. I mean, you got to have both of those pieces unless someone wears both of those hats. I mean,
And that's
you're all
totally
vital there.
Matt is very, very true. But Matt, who is our creative partner, is he really is such an amazing artist. And he is about pulling the stories out versus, this is going to be a shocker to no one probably, but oftentimes in politics, everything is poll tested. And
Yeah.
so everything that's communicated is what's said on a poll. And the reality is sometimes you say, okay, these are the top 3 issues on a poll, but issues 4, 5, and 6 are 1 point apart. Like,
Yeah.
really? I mean, that's
Yeah.
within the margin of error, so not to get all wonky, but so the thing that's so brilliant about Matt is he cares so deeply about people, and he takes the time to get to know the person that we're filming and really pulls out the stories. And sometimes it's such a cool process to watch too, because sometimes as he's talking to somebody, they'll say, oh, I forgot about that. And it's such a poignant
Yep.
part, and so yeah, I feel very, very fortunate to work with this team at Win, because I think that we do the best work in the business as far as political media goes. And it's because it's very intentional, and it is about storytelling, and it is about creating something beautiful and meaningful that resonates instead of something that's poll tested.
Yeah. No, that's it's been an inspiration for us too. I mean, that was reimagining polls is, obviously something that we're big on. We don't believe that if you ask 200 people something, it's a representation of the whole country, and that's something we're working on, is larger sample sizes, better questions, and different mediums to really have conversations with people. So we're working on that. And then also from a brand perspective, I mean, that aesthetic storytelling ability is something that we've tried to insert into CommonAlly as well, because just a lot of things and I'm sure in the civic tech space, first of all, everybody's fighting for the right thing, so there's no competition in that way. Like, there's no negativity, but it does matter how you reach people. And I think making sure it's not all copy heavy, and it's not all red, white, and blue, and it's not, like you said, the guy standing in
Yeah.
front of the bookcase.
Yours is totally
It's just a
different.
piece of a bookcase. It's not
Doesn't
real.
have enough law books on
Yeah. Yeah.
it.
It's all like mountains and grizzly bears. So,
I love it.
but I think it's important, and we've kind of followed a similar direction. So, I think what you're doing is definitely working really well. Um, Back to the gun issue really quickly. It's such a sad thing to say, but I think March was the only month where there was no school shooting, and it was literally because there was no school in session.
Right.
What does that say? And is there an opening there? Is that, have people capitalized on the opportunity to use that as a storytelling moment to show that that's absurd?
Yeah, I think so. It's definitely an ongoing struggle to find different entry points for people. And that's definitely one of them. And I don't know if you saw this. It was, I can't even remember who it was, but somebody tweeted out that she had told her daughter that they weren't going to, that school was canceled for however long. And the daughter got really excited and said, oh, good, less of a chance for me to be shot in my classroom. And, and it's just like, I don't have kids, but I have a godson and I have kids in my life that I care a great deal about. And every time I would hear one of them come back, and I'm talking about 4, 5, and 6 year olds coming back, talking about the active shooter drill that
Yeah.
they had to do. I don't know how you can't be infuriated by that.
Yep.
But the reality also, like I said earlier, is that school shootings and mass shootings are only a piece of it.
Yep.
And this is where I think it's so important. I often say we have to be able to walk and chew gum at the same time. We have to be able to take on multiple issues at the same time. So do I think that anybody, Joe Schmo on the street, needs to have an AR-15? And no, I don't. But I also think we have to be addressing handgun violence and safe storage and, capacity limits and licensing and all of these kinds of things. And they all work together, because the unfortunate truth is, and part of this is a media problem, they focus in on the mass shootings, and I call it grief porn. I don't know if I can say that, but I just did. So.
Say anything you want. Yeah.
Great. And we're seeing it right now too. It's just like, it's a week, maybe 2 weeks of this extended coverage of this tragedy. And oh God, it's so awful. And then we all move on until the next one, until the next, and that's just what's being reported. And that's, I think, part of the problem is there's such a lack of understanding of how much violence there really is day to day.
Yeah.
And so I do think that those kinds of metrics, like you said, like month of March, first time in March that there wasn't a school shooting in however many years. I think those types of stories are really, really important. But the thing that I think is also equally important is that is the entry point to have the broader conversation.
Yeah. I agree.
Yeah, we can't.
Sorry.
No, that's it.
No, I was going to say, when I spoke with Jamal and Matt from March for Our Lives as well, that was one of the first things Matt said too, is like, I asked them, like, how did you jump into action so quickly and like create a movement overnight, like at 18? And one of the first things he said is like, we know, we've been watching this, like we have a small window, like we don't do this now, like no one cares. And like, what that did, like, just my whole body shut down after hearing that. It's like how powerful that is and how true that is, unfortunately. Which is, I think, retraining all of us who, people who do want to really dive in on issues that affect people's lives and livelihoods. That window's small, and you have to be as effective as possible. So, making sure that we're having the right dialogue is vital. And I know we've spoke about this a little bit, but how would you suggest, especially on gun rights, right? Because I feel like that's one of the most polarizing issues is, gun ownership, gun rights, gun laws. And, you talk to someone who's a responsible gun owner who, maybe hunts or, target shoots or whatever, who's certainly not going to go and kill anyone and feels threatened by some of the movements you're involved with, right? Or some of that, just people who are on the opposite spectrum, or maybe not opposite, but are on the spectrum of advocating against, safety. I see a big middle ground there. How do we do the work to get there?
I I'm so glad you asked this question. I actually recently had a conversation. As you mentioned, I come from an incredibly conservative family, and I'm from West Texas, and I grew up hunting. So I have an appreciation for all of the things,
Yeah.
and I understand. I completely understand. And recently, I had a conversation. Actually, it was a guy I went to college with who is a responsible gun owner, and I don't even remember what I posted, and his reaction, even though it wasn't what I said, but his reaction to what I had posted, I think it was about the rise in domestic violence and gun sales. What his assumption was that I was saying all guns should be taken away.
Mm-hmm.
And I think the first thing, and his response was a little bit snarky, and I'm not going to lie, sometimes I get salty and give the snark back, but not always helpful. I stopped and I said, no, actually what I'm saying is 97% of Americans agree that universal background checks are a good idea. It fluctuates between 70s and the 90s as far as safe storage, licensing. There are things that everybody agrees on. And I oftentimes joke, 97% of Americans can't agree on what
anything.
The weather is like outside.
Yeah, seriously.
I mean?
Yeah.
So I think the first thing is we have to understand the powers at play, which is NRA leadership and gun manufacturers. They celebrate and sing and dance every time we have these fights. Every time that we can't sit down and have a conversation,
Mm-hmm.
they are just over the moon excited. And I want to be really clear. I'm saying NRA leadership. There are NRA members who are responsible gun owners who believe in universal background checks should happen, and all of these safe initiatives should happen. So I think it's really important that there's a differentiator there. But that leadership is just, like I said, they get real excited when we can't just have a conversation. Yeah. And when we jump from 0 to 1,000, because it feels like such a polarizing issue. But the reality is most people understand, and most people can agree on these very common sense initiatives. The issue around automatic weapons is a little bit tougher sometimes, and this is all anecdotal, but the conversations I've had with people with those responsible gun owners, none of them are hunting with an AR-15. Mm-hmm. And if they are, they're doing it wrong. And they make fun of people who say they are. And so, you know what I mean? That's not a real thing. And then the other piece of the conversation too is, can you be a responsible gun owner and have an AR-15? Absolutely. Is that going to stop somebody from stealing it, from a family member or somebody, having access to it that shouldn't? And we've seen this over and over and over again, that, the access to these weapons. And again, that goes back to a little bit of safe storage and things like that, but just the chance of it falling into the wrong hands, to me, is enough to say, okay, maybe we should take those off the table. I'm not talking about hunting rifles. I'm not talking about all handguns and all of those kinds of things. But I do think you're right. I do think that there are places where we can absolutely agree, and we can come together and just have this dialogue and have these conversations. And then the next step of that is we have to push our elected officials.
Yes.
And I it's not funny, but I do joke that almost never do politicians do the right thing because they just do the right thing. They have to be forced to do it, and or afraid to lose their jobs. And
probably more the latter.
Yeah, and this is one of those issues where, if you look at, there's money involved, there's a systemic problem with democracy involved, and Citizens United, and all these kinds of different things that we could talk about later. But the bottom line is, we're the ones who make these choices. And I can completely appreciate, again, 20 years in politics, I'm jaded too. But, there's this idea that, my vote doesn't count, my vote doesn't matter. But that, it will continue to be true if you continue to not show up, So.
No, I agree. I forgot who the woman was in Boston who won by one vote. And it's just like, this really happens, and it does matter. And, we have the numbers, the people do have the power if they turn out, but if you don't turn out, then it's just not going to change. There's no motivation to do so, like you said.
Right.
and on that topic too, of kind of trying to find that common ground. I mean, common ally literally came out of like my relationship with my dad, which, you know, I don't know that I've ever even said that publicly, but love him to death. We don't agree politically. He's a gun owner, I'm not, but I grew up fishing and hiking and camping, and like, you know, certainly understand that world. And I don't, you know, I don't look down upon that at all. Like, and my whole thing is like, how do we figure this out? Like, and I think it does take a conversation and understanding to get to that point. So yeah, I just think that's a part of all of this. And I think the more that we can do that, the more that we can understand. And I'm glad that you laid out this conversation in the way you did, because I think it's easy for people, and it's their media diet too. You know, I think people are very easy to just, they hear a soundbite and then it's boom, back in that corner. And this is a Second Amendment issue and it's a slippery slope and you're going to take our babies. Right. And it's like, I don't want the conversation to always devolve into that, because we will never get anywhere and no one wins in that situation. One side's always going to feel threatened and the other side's always going to feel like they're not getting anywhere. So I think it's our jobs to try to bolster that middle more here. So again, I think you're doing amazing work in that space.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah. I mean,
Or
and I think that it can be said about all of these really, really tough issues. And that's, I had somebody recently tell me, you know, she said, what is your advocacy work? And I kind of laid it out. She said, oh, okay. So like the hardest issues on the planet, kind of, but you know, as you sort of navigate all these different spaces, you come to see that they all intersect. You
yep.
can't decouple them. I mean, I can't talk about climate without talking about justice. I can't talk about justice without talking about guns. I can't talk about guns without talking about domestic violence. I can't, you know, I can't function in any of these spaces without, not well anyway, without realizing that they are all connected, which in turn means, I mean, it's just a reminder that we're all connected, not to be, you know, a cheesy whatever, but we are. And this is, I mean, honestly, the place we're in now with this global pandemic is a reminder that we can't escape it. As much as we try, as many walls or whatever as any person who remain nameless wants to build, we are connected, and that is just the truth. That's my truth anyway.
Yeah, no, it is. And that's, I think I keep using the term, it takes a pandemic, because it's like for everything.
Yes.
It took a pandemic to realize I'm a teacher now. And it takes a pandemic to realize there's issues in our backyards and in our neighbors' houses that we might have overlooked willingly or unwillingly before. So, you know, I think out of adversity comes prosperity, if you harness that moment and if you do the right things with it. And I'm optimistic, and I am seeing a lot of people kind of use this time to wake up in a sense. And I hope more people do. I hope more people turn out. And I would love to kind of end on a positive note as well. I know we're diving into some heavy stuff here, but where do you see the optimism? A few different things here. Where do you see the optimism? How do we keep progressing forward collectively? And I'd love to see how people can get involved with Love and Freedom and anything else that that people can get involved with.
I think that where I feel hopeful is people's willingness to stay connected through this time. I mean, I keep hearing over and over and over again. I mean, even people saying I'm talking to my family more than I've ever spoken to them before, you know, and I'm like, that's a good thing, you know, and people's creativity. Oh my gosh. I love, whether it's my political clients or advocacy clients, just people's creativity and getting outside sort of what's the norm, you know, quote unquote, the norm. And I keep saying, in fact, I have a piece that's coming out that's kind of about this, is if we go back to normal, we have failed.
Yes.
And I think that there's an understanding of that. And as much, I've been talking for years and years about smashing the patriarchy, and man, did we have the opportunity to do that, because it is all front and center now. And speaking of the creativity, you mentioned love and freedom. So our website is loveandfreedomproject.org. And if you go up to the top, there's a tab that's Get Involved. And so we have these, Abby just is super creative, and like in ways that I can't even understand sometimes, but she's created these do-it-yourself scarf kits where you can buy these kits, and there's like live streams where she teaches you how, and some of the women jump in, and it's just really cool. And then there's masks. There's these like masks here.
Oh, wow.
That Abby and the women are making as well. And my lighting, proceeds from this light go to support our women, and every single dollar that comes in goes to support these incredible women who have fought like hell to get out of the situations they were in and find stability in their lives and be good moms to their children. And it's just seeing the progress that's been made has been really, really incredible. So loveandfreedomproject.org, would love for y'all to go check that out. And then I often say, and I'm going to break my own rule here, that we have to stop telling young people that they inspire us, because while they do, and I feel it all the time, I think we say it and almost excuse ourselves. We're like, oh, they've got this. And in the same breath that we say they inspire us, oftentimes the next thing is that they're future leaders. And I'm like, no, they're leading now, right now. And so while they do inspire me a great, great deal, I don't excuse myself, and I hope none of us will excuse ourselves and think that we don't have to walk alongside them and fight for justice and fight for what we need to see change here. And so that's another thing that does keep me hopeful, though. Right now in this moment, I'm seeing a lot of cross-generational collaboration, which wasn't always the case. And I mean, Matt and Jamal are two of my favorite humans ever, and I do tons of work with them, and I love them so much. But we're just seeing it, I feel like, on a larger scale, where generations are coming together a little bit more readily than they were before. And I think that's necessary. I think it really is necessary. Young people have the creativity that's coming out of that generation is like mind blowing. But then there's experience to learn from, and to do's and don'ts, things that didn't work that like we can share with each other too. So that was a lot that I just spit out there.
No, that was exactly what I asked, and that was like a 4-question. So I think you nailed all of them. No, that's perfect, and I like the walking side by side and not just like calling out inspiration, but being a part of that. I think is memorable for sure. I'm glad people can hear that. That's the advice I was hoping for, and I think that's like optimism with pressure and challenge mixed into it, which I think we need. Whether people want to hear that or not, like we kind of have to motivate and push ourselves to be a part of the solution and the change that we want, and I think that's the way to do it. Last thing before I let you go, I know we're probably way over time here, but too bad.
That's okay. I love it.
Yeah. I could do this all day. Can you give us as CommonAlly any advice on what we can do better, or how we can maybe, drive home our mission?
Gosh, I feel like y'all really have a handle of all of the pillars of my belief system, from storytelling to finding common ground to being willing to bring voices together and not being afraid to, we just had a conversation about 27 different things. And oftentimes people will tell you that's a terrible idea. And I don't know, maybe it is, but like I said, it's all connected. So I don't know. I feel like y'all really are on a great trajectory and a great path. And I hope you just keep it up and don't let some expert change your trajectory, because it really is. Especially right now, it's content is key, and the content that you're creating is informative and inspiring and exciting. And I think those are all the things we need right now.
Thank you. Wow. Okay. Well, I'll take that. Before you say anything negative, I'm out of here. Bye. No. Thank you. Well, Rania, this has been amazing. And I'm going to say it, you are inspiring, but you've also inspired me to walk next to you. And I hope other people out there are going to do that as well. So thank you so much for talking with us today.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.